Hi everyone. Let's do obesity part 2, or as I like to call it, how did we get here in the first place? This particular conversation is a commentary more on American culture and how we as a population got to be 30% obese. Not on your personal views of food, though I think it's really useful to look at how we've evolved as people to understand kind of what's going on around us. Our environment influences us heavily, whether we like it or not. So here's the thing. This is really simple and really straightforward. And sometimes I think we get too complicated when we talk about why America is so obese. This is real simple as far as I'm concerned. And this is Dr. Zait's opinion, by the way. So, other people will disagree. But I personally think it comes down to this. Junk food tastes better than healthy food. It does. I'm sorry, it does. Do you know why? Because there is a guy at Frito-Lay whose job it is to make the next flavor of Dorito. That's actually a job. By the way, he's a chemistry major and I'm a chemistry major, and I'm really mad that I didn't know about that on career day, but slightly off topic. Food companies that make heavily processed foods. I prefer the term manufactured foods because I think it really makes the distinction. Rice is a processed food because you have to process it to eat it. You can't eat it right off the plant. But we don't think about that like a processed food. So we're going to talk about foods that are manufactured, right? Foods that are manufactured have entire research and development departments dedicated to making them taste good. Meaning they manipulate the contents of the food to make it more appealing to us as consumers so that we buy it. It's a food industrial complex. I mean, Monsanto is whatever you think about them. I'm not worried about Monsanto and Bayer. I'm worried about companies that are manufacturing foods that we know are not good for us because they make money off of them. And they're engineering the foods to be more and more appealing so that we eat those things instead of fruits and vegetables and lean meats, etc. There is an industry in the United States, in the world, designed to manufacture a food supply that undermines our drive to eat healthy food. And it's not just about taste, it's a little more complicated. As it turns out, when we eat foods that contain high levels of carbohydrate and high levels of fat together, it triggers a pleasure pathway in the brain. It's basically an addiction pathway. And yeah, addiction pathway. So if you'll notice, there really aren't many foods in nature that have high carbs and high fats at the same time. It's almost always like one or the other, and there's a reason for that. We're not designed to eat those two things together. And when we do, our brain triggers this pathway. We get release of pleasure-inducing chemicals, and we feel a disproportionate amount of pleasure from eating these foods. And when we don't eat them, we get cravings. So it's not just that manufactured foods taste better, but they also drive cravings in a way that natural foods cannot do. In a way that fruit fresh off of the tree or beets fresh out of the ground will never trigger you in the same way that those manufactured foods do. Because they can't. Because they don't have engineers to do that for them. They grow the way they grow. Then let's add on top of that the fact that we have entire television networks in the United States dedicated to food, to the worship of food. We have set this expectation that every meal we're going to eat is a culinary experience. It's got to taste really good all the time. It's got to trigger that pleasure pathway all the time. That's our expectation. Kale cannot live up to this expectation. I'm not telling you kale can't be delicious, because it can. My children disagree, but whatever. Kale can be delicious. However, in order to make fruits and vegetables, lean meats, whole grains really delicious, you need to have a certain skill set and a little bit of time. And in a culture where we feel consistently pressed for time, where manufactured foods are more appealing and easier than healthier foods, do we really wonder why we're in this position now? Where suddenly we're obese and we don't know how to stop it. And the answer is, for the most part, food choice and the way we view food. Then there's this other thing that sometimes happens, and this one really bothers me because the commentary on our lives here is really truly depressing. When I start talking to people about healthy lifestyle change, I rarely talk about weight loss, actually. Just let's pick a healthier trajectory and the weight thing will work itself out. What they'll tell me is that they feel really deprived if they can't have whatever. If they don't have like sweets after dinner, they feel really deprived. When we drill down through those feelings, what I get down to is I'm really unhappy when I don't get those things. I can't be happy. I can't be comfortable. I can't enjoy life if I don't have access to these foods. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And one, not good for you. But two, what kind of commentary is that on our view of life that we feel so deprived emotionally when we make the decision to choose healthier options? What really? That's like the saddest thing I can think of. Really, the idea that our lives are so dismal that donuts make it better. That's not about food, guys. That's about something else. And food is what you're using to medicate that feeling. So if you're that person, you gotta get your head right and deal with your mindset before you're ever gonna achieve a healthier lifestyle. That's just how it is. So the question from there is, what do you do about it? Because we now have these little pathways in our head that expect to be triggered by our high fat, high carbohydrate diets. And how do we pivot and start doing something healthier without making ourselves insane? Because what I'm not telling you, by the way, that you can never eat a donut. But what I am telling you is that you can never again eat a donut without understanding what it's going to do to your brain chemistry. And I never ever want you to eat another donut without thinking about why you're doing it. Is it your source of sensory input? Is it your source of pleasure? Is it because you're craving? I just want you to recognize it. I don't even need you to take action necessarily, but just that recognition, I think, really does make a difference for people. Now, you'll notice that at no point here did I talk about the fact that, obese people can just choose not to eat these foods. Remember that we have now established some brain chemistry that makes that extremely, extremely difficult. So this is not entirely about choices. It's also about where we've already been and then, kind of trying to deal with our own past and move toward the future. There's an interesting quirk about human biology that it does look like in some people, if you get to a certain weight, that's where your body expects to be forever. So if you get to a BMI of 30, and then you try to drop down to a BMI of 25, your body is going to try to drive you back to a BMI of 30. It's going to increase your cravings. It's going to increase your desire for food. It's going to make you tired so you don't exercise so much, etc. Some of us may have actually, unfortunately, set ourselves at a BMI that it's going to be very difficult to get out of. And by difficult, I really mean prohibitive in the current American lifestyle. It's going to be really hard. And so even if becoming obese is about our food choice, entirely about food choices, which I don't believe it is, there's all these other little like psychosocial factors that play in here. Even if it is, the getting out of it is not as simple as reversing your behaviors. It's more complicated than that. And I would argue that because of that, we need to know how we got here so we don't send our kids down the same pathway. But for ourselves, for the adults in the family, we need to reestablish health goals that are realistic and that are actually, achievable without making ourselves crazy. Because if it's not achievable, if it's not sustainable, it's never going to work. So what I'd encourage you to do is this. For the next week or so, look at what you eat and ask yourself why you're eating it. Why did I pick this today? When was the last time I had a food like this? Am I craving? Or is it really what I want? Am I craving it? What's the deal? Think about it. Think about what you eat for a minute and really investigate why you're there. It might be enlightening to you. And just one more thing. So if you are one of those people who eats because it makes you happy, because it's the thing that brings you joy. If you're someone who eats because you're lonely, because you're bored, if you have already identified those triggers, please understand this. You will never, ever get to a healthier place until you deal with it. You have to get your head in the right place. If you get your head right, your weight will follow, your health will follow. But this is entirely a mind game. And that is where you need to focus first. It's really where we all need to focus. We need to focus on the mental piece. And if we focus on the mental piece, the rest of it's going to follow us. I'd love to hear what other people think about sort of this food industrial complex and how it kind of feeds into our current culture. If you have questions about anything that I've said, let me know. The next thing that I'm going to talk about, kind of part 3 of all of this, is what do we do about it? What should a treatment plan look like? And how do we balance that with our sense of self-worth? Because I think that can get a little complicated. So hang on, we'll do that video in a little bit. And then after that, we'll kind of see where we go. Okay? Bye, everybody.